It began on a quiet silver morning when the Galactic Council's monitoring stations, which had watched the quarantine zone for centuries without seeing a single flicker of life, suddenly trembled with a soft pulse of energy that made the scanners glitch, freeze, and restart as if something old and powerful had just breathed for the first time in hundreds of years, and the technicians sitting in the cold metal observation room felt a chill crawl across their backs because nothing, absolutely nothing, was supposed to move inside the zone. The quarantine zone was a dead place in every map, every history book, every law of the galaxy, sealed after the Great Collapse when an entire civilization vanished inside it, leaving behind debris fields, ruined star cities, broken war machines, and a silence so deep even sound seemed afraid to enter. For 300 years, no empire dared cross its borders. No explorer had returned. No light came out. It was a graveyard where suns died and secrets slept. The Council used it as a warning for young species. This is what happens when power grows too big. But on that quiet morning, one small beeping sound shattered the legend. At first, the signal was faint, just a tiny ripple of movement in the darkness. The scanners zoomed in, adjusting resolution, trying to catch the source. And then the screen froze. The operators leaned closer, confused, tapping buttons, resetting displays, as the image sharpened and began to reveal shapes. One shape, then 10, then 50, and slowly, like ghosts rising from deep water, hundreds of ships began to appear on the feed. They rose from the blackness like a fleet waking from a long sleep. Their hulls were coated in strange reflective metals never seen in the Council databases, materials that bent light and made the ships shimmer like shadows wrapped in starlight. Engines glowed silently, without exhaust, without noise, without heat signatures. The operators stared at the screen with wide eyes, breaths trapped in their chests. One whispered, "This can't be real." But the fleet continued to rise, forming a perfect formation. Triangle wings, diamond patterns, flawless discipline. Something only a species with extreme military mastery could achieve. A senior officer ran into the room, demanded to know what they were seeing. But when he looked at the footage, the blood drained from his face. "No one is in the zone," he whispered. "No one has been in the zone for 3 centuries. But the truth was staring back at him, ships, moving in coordinated silence, old metal gleaming under distant stars. He zoomed in closer, focusing on the lead vessel, searching the hull for any identifiable markings. And there it was, half buried beneath layers of dust and cosmic frost. An Earth emblem. The officers gasped. Some stepped back as if the screen might explode. One woman covered her mouth. "Humans?" she whispered. Humans were supposed to be gone. The Council had declared Earth destroyed 280 years ago during the collapse, saying that humans were unlucky victims of a cosmic catastrophe, nothing more than a species wiped away by nature. The Council held ceremonies, moments of silence, lectures about fragile species. And yet here were human ships, alive, active, rising from the very place the Council claimed had consumed Earth. The alarm spread through the Council building like fire. Ambassadors ran from their chambers. High officials shouted orders. Emergency bells rang above the marketplace. The quarantine zone, once a silent grave, was alive. Panic rippled across the galaxy in minutes. On distant colonies, civilians gathered around public screens, watching the footage in disbelief. "Humans?" they murmured. "Impossible." In military academies, instructors stopped their lessons as the news blasted through the halls. In the great floating cities of the Kirax Empire, elders trembled because they remembered the old rumors, the ones the Council tried to bury. Rumors that humans did not die easily, rumors that humans survived things others could not, rumors that Earth had disappeared not because it was weak, but because it was hiding something the galaxy feared. Inside the Grand Council chamber, ambassadors shouted over one another, their voices filled with fear and confusion. How did humans enter the zone? Why were we told Earth was destroyed? What are those ships? But one quiet ambassador, old and wise, stood up slowly and whispered a truth no one wanted to hear. Humans never died. They hid. His words fell like stones into water, sending waves of fear through the room. Suddenly, screens lit up again. The human fleet was moving. Not drifting, not wandering, advancing. Their formation tightened, their hull lights dimmed, and their engines glowed brighter. They were heading toward the Council's space. The Council's military scrambled defenses. Ships were deployed. Generals shouted commands. But no one knew what to prepare for. No one knew what humans had become after hiding for 3 centuries. And no one knew what else was inside the quarantine zone with them. The scanners zoomed out again, revealing something even more terrifying. Behind the human ships, deep within the zone's fog of debris, the darkness shifted. Something massive moved, like a planet-sized shadow turning its gaze toward the galaxy. The council officer stared at the moving darkness and felt his heart turn cold. He whispered, trembling, "What did the humans wake up in there?" But the truth was not that humans had woken something. Humans had been living with the darkness, surviving it, mastering it. And now they were coming back, not as victims, not as refugees, but as something far more powerful. A species reborn from a place no one else dared enter. The galaxy had told itself humans were gone. But the truth was rising from the zone like dawn from endless night. Humanity was alive. Humanity had evolved, and humanity was returning. Panic spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire as the human fleet continued its silent advance, moving with a unity so perfect it felt unnatural, almost like a single living creature stretching its wings after centuries of sleep, and every officer watching the scanners felt a tightening in their chest because nothing about this made sense. Humans were not supposed to exist, much less command a fleet so advanced and disciplined that even the oldest empires hesitated to breathe too loudly in its presence. In the command tower, alarms flashed crimson, casting sharp red shadows on the polished floors as ambassadors ran from one holoscreen to another, screaming for answers that no one had, demanding explanations from military officers who could only shake their heads helplessly. Humans were wiped out, one ambassador shrieked. Earth is gone, another insisted. But the reality glowed right in front of them, hundreds of human vessels, each one moving like it knew exactly where it belonged. Their hulls gleaming with strange patterns, their engines emitting an energy signature that did not match any known human technology. A young technician, sweating as he tapped commands on his console, cried out suddenly, "They're not answering our hails. They're not broadcasting any signals." Silence from a living species was terrifying enough. A young technician, sweating as he tapped commands on his console, cried out suddenly, "They're not answering our hails. They're not broadcasting any signals." Silence from a living species was terrifying enough, but silence from humans, especially humans who had survived the quarantine zone, was something else entirely. "Are they preparing for war?" an ambassador whispered, trembling. The military commander shook his head, not in assurance, but in fear. "I don't know what they're preparing for," he answered. "And that terrifies me more." The scanners zoomed closer, picking up tiny details on the ships, battle scars that could only come from fighting things far more dangerous than any council enemy, mysterious glowing cracks across hull plating, symbols etched into the metal like warnings or prayers, and every mark told the same story. These humans had not survived the zone by luck. They had survived by becoming something else. Meanwhile, in the observation decks below, civilians gathered in crowds, staring up at the sky where the first faint glimmers of the human fleet had begun to appear, shimmering like pale stars moving in unnatural formation. Parents held their children close. Soldiers gripped their rifles with clammy hands. Elders whispered old myths about Earth, stories told long ago about human courage, human madness, human unpredictability. Some whispered about the old legends, the ones the council banned, the ones saying that humans never died quietly, never surrendered easily, and never forgot an enemy. But what terrified the crowd the most was the obvious truth. This fleet did not look like the old Earth ships from the archives. These were sleeker, darker, almost organic in design, moving as if they had adapted to something alien, something monstrous lurking in the zone. On the highest balcony of the council tower, the chancellor stood frozen, wind whipping through her robe as she watched the formation. "Why didn't they answer us?" she whispered to her aide. The aide swallowed hard. "Maybe they can't." But deep down, both women knew the real reason: humans were choosing silence. And silence was the most dangerous language humans spoke. Back inside the command center, an older ambassador accessed forbidden files, classified logs about Earth's last transmission before the collapse. He read the words aloud, voice shaking. "Do not follow us. Do not enter the zone. If we fail, seal it forever." Everyone stared at him. "You mean they chose the zone? Why would any species go in there? Why would they stay?" The ambassador looked up slowly, eyes wide with an emotion no one could mistake. Fear. "Because the thing inside the zone was not a threat to humanity," he whispered. "It was a threat to everyone else." As the room fell silent, the sensors suddenly picked up another signal. Something huge, something moving behind the human fleet, too large to be a ship, too slow to be a weapon, too alive to be ignored. The scanners struggled to focus, glitching with static and interference. Slowly, a shape began to form. A massive shadow, shifting in the darkness of the zone, almost as if it were watching the galaxy back. Officers went pale. A diplomat fainted, and the technician monitoring the feed whispered, trembling so hard his voice cracked, "The humans, they're not escaping the zone. They're holding it back." That sentence fell over the room like a funeral bell. Suddenly, everything made sense, but in the worst possible way. The humans weren't returning for revenge. The humans weren't attacking. The humans weren't demanding anything. They were coming forward because the thing behind them was far worse than anything the galaxy had ever prepared for. The human fleet moved in perfect lines, formation tightening as if shielding the galaxy from what lurked behind. Their silence was no longer frightening. It was heartbreaking. Silence wasn't aggression. Silence was burden. And humanity had been carrying that burden alone for 3 centuries. The council officers stared at the screen in frozen horror as one truth settled over them like ice. The galaxy hadn't been protecting itself from the quarantine zone. The humans had been protecting the galaxy from what lived inside it. The tension inside the Galactic Council reached a breaking point as the shadow behind the human fleet grew clearer, stretching across the scanner screens like a living eclipse, and every officer who saw it felt their heartbeat slow in dread because the shape was wrong. Too large, too unnatural, too ancient. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a station. It was something the galaxy had forgotten long before Earth was born. Something with edges that shimmered like broken glass and a presence so heavy it made the scanners tremble as if they were afraid to look directly at it. The council chamber erupted into shouting, but beneath the noise there was one silent truth running under every heartbeat. Whatever lived inside the zone was awake now. Meanwhile, in the observation deck high above the capital city, crowds stared at the sky as the first wave of human ships came into full view, their black hulls reflecting streaks of silver light like scars earned in battles no one else had survived. A child tugged at her mother's robe and whispered, "Mama, why do the human ships look sad?" The mother couldn't answer, because as she looked at the fleet, emotion churned inside her chest. Fear, awe, and something else she couldn't name. The humans weren't flying with pride. They were flying with purpose. A heavy purpose. A burden. Down in the command center, the council generals argued whether to open fire, but the oldest general slammed his hand onto the table and growled, "You fools! Look at their formation, they're not preparing to attack us. They're preparing to shield us." His words froze the room. On the main screen, the human ships locked themselves into a massive defensive crescent facing the darkness of the zone, their engines burning at identical intensity, their positions shifting with the precision of soldiers who had practiced this motion thousands of times. They were forming a wall, a shield, a line between the galaxy and whatever monster lurked behind them. The technicians zoomed in on one of the human vessels. The marks on its hull told a story none of them wanted to hear. Deep claw-like grooves ran across its side. Burn scars lined the plating. Strange black residue covered sections of the wings, as if something had melted parts of the ship with chemicals unknown to the council. A trembling officer whispered, "What kind of enemy does that to a starship?" Another whispered back, "One that humans have been fighting alone." At that moment, the council's main hologram flickered violently before stabilizing, revealing an image of the human flagship, massive, dark, its armor rippling like it was alive. Then the feed focused on a section near the front, an open viewing deck. A single human stood there. A woman, tall, strong, wearing a suit of matte black metal that looked grown instead of built. Her eyes glowed faintly with a golden hue, and the room fell silent as she lifted her gaze toward the council station as if she could see straight through screens and walls and metal. She raised her hand, and instantly every human ship behind her adjusted formation. The council officers stared in horror and awe. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "A soldier? A commander? A machine?" The answer came from an unexpected voice. One of the oldest ambassadors, his hands shaking as he read from a classified file that hadn't been opened in 3 centuries. "She is a custodian of Earth." The room spun. Custodians were myths, whispered stories from before the collapse. Humans chosen to guard humanity's greatest secrets, protectors of ancient knowledge, leaders trained to hold an entire species steady in times of doom. But no one had ever seen one. Until now. The custodian spoke, her voice finally crackling through every council communication line, soft yet strong enough to quiet the entire planet. "Stand down. Do not interfere. The zone is awakening." Every ambassador froze. Even the strongest warrior species felt a cold shiver crawl up their spine. Her tone held no threat, only sorrow. 3 centuries ago, she continued, our ancestors chose to enter the zone, not to hide, but to fight. The screens shifted again, showing grainy recordings. Humans battling in black corridors filled with strange creatures, towering machines waking from deep rust, storms of energy tearing ships apart. The room gasped as the truth bled through every image. The custodian spoke again, voice barely above a whisper, yet heavy enough to break hearts. "We held the line alone. We lost millions, but we kept the darkness inside." Tears filled the eyes of even the coldest council members. Humans had never vanished. Humans had never fled. Humans had never died. They had simply stood alone in the dark so the rest of the galaxy could live in the light. "But now," she said, turning her head slightly toward the shifting shadow behind her fleet, "the darkness grows stronger. We cannot hold it alone anymore." The room trembled. The ships trembled. The very air felt thick with destiny. The custodian lifted her hand again. The human fleet reformed instantly, engines flaring blue. "We are emerging from the zone," she said. "Not for war, not for revenge, but for survival." Her eyes sharpened like a sun piercing through storm clouds. "All species, all empires, all worlds." Then, in a voice so soft it felt like a prayer whispered into the heart of the universe, she said the words that shattered the galaxy's belief in human weakness forever. "Help us hold the darkness, or watch your stars fade one by one." The council chamber fell into a suffocating silence after the custodian's final words, and for a moment it felt as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something that could make sense of the nightmare unfolding before them. But no one could, because every ambassador, every general, every advisor knew that nothing in their history, nothing in their archives, nothing in their countless peaceful years had prepared them for this truth. Humanity had not been sleeping, hiding, or rebuilding. They had been fighting a war so ancient, so terrible, and so endless that even speaking of it made the lights flicker as if the darkness itself was listening. The council members trembled as the hologram replayed fragments of the custodian's message. Her eyes filled with quiet sadness that cut deeper than any threat, and one ambassador finally broke down, sinking to his knees as he whispered, "We left them alone in there. We believed their world died, and they were bleeding in the dark." His words shivered through the hall like a cold wind. Suddenly, the floor shook, a deep rumble from the sky, as if something massive was approaching the capital. The screens flared to life again, and what they showed made every living soul freeze. The shadow behind the human fleet was growing, unfolding like wings carved from darkness and cosmic storms, shifting with the slow hunger of something ancient recognizing new prey. The technicians tried to scan it again, but their equipment glitched, sparks flying, alarms blaring as if the creature's mere presence corrupted technology. Some officers stepped back from their consoles, panic rising. "Why is it moving toward us?" one screamed, but the answer came from the custodian, her voice returning to the speakers with unbearable heaviness. It senses life, she said. It always has. Suddenly, the human fleet changed formation again. But this time, the transformation was breathtaking, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. Dozens of human ships flew forward, positioning themselves between the Council world and the expanding shadow, engines blazing with a blue fire no alien species had ever seen. A shimmering barrier of energy stretched outward from the human flagship, linking with the other vessels in a way no alien technology had ever managed, forming a massive shield that pulsed like a beating heart. The Council gasped, not because the shield was strong, but because it was alive. It responded to the custodian's heartbeat. A species that had once been mocked for being primitive had created something the galaxy thought impossible, technology infused with living resonance. But the more terrifying truth was visible on the human ships themselves. The scars, the melted surfaces, the claw marks, the black, crawling residue left by the creature inside the zone. One ambassador whispered, voice cracking, "How long? How long have they been fighting that thing?" And the custodian answered, without emotion, without pride, without anger, only with tired honesty. 3 centuries. The chamber erupted again. Screams, cries, denials. Humans don't live that long. How did they survive? How did their ships evolve? But the custodian didn't explain because she didn't need to. The galaxy understood. Humans had traded peace for survival, comfort for battle, time for duty, and now they stood at the galaxy's edge again. Bleeding, scarred, exhausted but unbroken. The shadow behind them shifted again, revealing something even worse. Glowing red fissures across its surface, like burning eyes slowly opening. A wave of cold energy blasted out from it, passing through the cameras and sensors, making everyone watching feel as though icy fingers were crawling across their bones. Children cried, soldiers trembled, elders fainted, and in the center of the screen, the custodian stood unmoving, unshaken, her eyes glowing brighter, her suit humming with power that made the room vibrate. "Council," she said softly, "you do not understand what wakes behind us. We barely contained it in the zone. And now the walls are breaking." The Chancellor tried to speak, but her voice collapsed into a terrified whisper. What does it want?" The custodian turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward the red fissures in the shadow, her face pale, her expression heavy with memories she wished she could forget. "It wants everything," she said. "Stars, worlds, life." A hologram behind her showed dozens of ancient ruins inside the zone, civilizations erased long before the Council existed. "It devours," she whispered. "It adapts. It grows. And without us holding it back, it will reach all of you next." The room shook again, this time with a pulse so strong it cracked one of the glass panels overlooking the city. People screamed. The sky outside darkened as if a giant cloud began spreading across space. But it wasn't a cloud. It was the shadow drawing closer, pushing at the borders of reality. The custodian lifted her hand toward the camera, and her voice softened into something mournful. "We never asked for help. We never wanted anyone else to suffer. But we can no longer hold the line alone." Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with a deep human ache. "If you turn away now, the darkness will follow us all." And in that single moment, the galaxy finally understood why humans were called dangerous. Not because of their rage, not because of their weapons, but because of their ability to stand at the edge of extinction, not for themselves but for everyone. The galaxy had mocked humanity, but now the galaxy realized humanity had been its shield, and that shield was breaking. The Council world fell into a trembling hush as the darkness behind the human fleet finally pushed its full weight into the scanners, distorting the airwaves, cracking the holograms, and sending a cold wave so deep into the Council chamber that even the bravest warriors felt their hearts skip in instinctive terror, the kind of primal fear that whispered of ancient predators lurking before the dawn of civilization. And for the first time in their long, proud history, they understood what it meant to face something far older than their laws, older than their empire, older than memory itself. The custodian stood tall inside her flagship, the faint golden glow in her eyes burning brighter as she stared into the abyss behind her. the shadows shifting like a storm beast stretching its limbs after centuries of confinement, and her voice, when it finally returned through the projector lines, was heavier than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. "You must understand," she said. "This thing does not attack like your enemies. It does not negotiate. It does not retreat. It consumes." Her words shook the ambassadors like thunder, because the holograms now showed ruined worlds deep inside the zone. Planets stripped of their surfaces, cities melted into glass, bones twisted into strange shapes as if the creature had tasted life and reshaped it at will. No species in the Council had ever seen such destruction, yet the humans had lived among it, fought inside it, survived within it. A military general wiped cold sweat from his forehead and whispered, How did you survive 300 years against something like that?" And the custodian's answer was so quiet it made every heart ache. "We didn't survive. We endured." The screen shook violently again as the shadow expanded, tendrils of energy curling outward, touching the edges of real space with a hunger that felt alive. Another pulse from the creature hit the scanners. Half the equipment in the council chamber sparked and died, lights flickering wildly as a low rumbling groan echoed across the planet, as if the creature's presence alone was bending the atmosphere. People outside screamed as the sky dimmed, a veil of darkness sweeping across the horizon like a fast-moving storm. The council city plunged into half-light, and the panic spread like wildfire. "Look!" someone shouted from the viewing deck. When the ambassadors turned, they gasped as the human fleet dropped into an even tighter formation, drawing closer together, their engines glowing with a fierce blue fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. Fast, steady, unafraid. They were bracing for impact. The custodian's voice cracked for the first time as she spoke again, exhaustion bleeding through her control. "We held this creature inside the zone, but the barrier is broken now. The zone is collapsing. It can reach your worlds in days." The Chancellor collapsed into her chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Why didn't you warn us?" she cried. The custodian lowered her head in pain. "We tried. Your ancestors refused to listen. They said humans were too young, too loud, too emotional to be trusted with truths of this scale. So we stood alone. We buried the last message Earth sent to you. And we went into the zone to stop the creature before it reached you." The whole chamber felt as if someone had punched the air out of the galaxy. Humans hadn't been hiding. Humans had been protecting everyone. They had done the job no one else wanted to do. They had carried a burden meant for all species, and they had carried it alone. Then, without warning, the shadow unleashed a massive wave of energy. The scanners went pitch black. The planet trembled. Windows shattered. Towers swayed dangerously. People screamed and dove for cover. But when vision returned, the sight outside made everyone freeze. The human fleet had taken the hit. Their shields rippled like storm-torn cloth. Ships shook and twisted but held the line, refusing to break, refusing to fall back. One human destroyer absorbed the worst of the blast, its hull tearing open piece by piece, but instead of retreating it accelerated forward, positioning its wounded body between the council station and the darkness, acting like a shield even in death. An ambassador screamed, "Why would they do that for us? Why sacrifice themselves?" And the custodian turned her head toward the galaxy's leaders, her face sorrowful and proud all at once, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "Because that is what humans are," she said. "We protect, even when you fear us, even when you mock us, even when we bleed alone in the dark." The chamber fell silent, painfully, deeply silent, as the truth hit them all at once. Humans were not returning for war. They were returning for help. They were returning because the darkness was coming for everyone. The custodian lifted her arm, activating a deep resonance signal that echoed across the galaxy. Her eyes glowed brighter, her voice gaining the force of thunder. "Galactic Council," she declared, "the time has come. Join us, or watch your worlds burn." And as every species stared into the abyss behind the human fleet, into the monstrous hunger spreading across the stars, they realized something they would never forget. Humanity had never been the danger. The danger was what humanity had held back. The council chamber felt like a sinking ship as the custodian's ultimatum echoed through the air, every syllable striking the ambassadors like cold iron, forcing them to confront the truth they had avoided for centuries. Humanity had stood between them and extinction, and now that S.H.I.E.L.D. was cracking under the weight of a monster older than their entire civilization. Outside, the sky continued to darken as the shadow hung like a living eclipse over the planet, its presence twisting gravity, bending light, making the clouds churn as if afraid to exist under its gaze, and the faint cries of terrified civilians drifted upward through the windows, adding a heavy sorrow that no one inside could ignore. The Chancellor pushed herself to her feet, but her legs trembled so hard she had to grip the podium to stay upright. What does this creature want from us?" she whispered. The custodian appeared again on the hologram, her armor glowing like a dying star. "It wants life," she said softly. "It wants minds. It wants to feed. When one world is empty, it moves to the next." A chilling silence followed as the ambassadors imagined their worlds. Children, families, oceans, forests, devoured by the same fate that had erased civilizations inside the zone. Suddenly another violent pulse slammed into the human fleet, harder than the first. The shields screamed with pressure. One human ship spiraled downward, engines failing, trailing sparks like burning tears across the sky. And even as that ship fell, it turned its body deliberately, positioning itself between the council city and the blast. It sacrificed itself without hesitation. The city roared with shock as the human cruiser exploded in a wave of blue light, a shockwave rippling across the planet's atmosphere. Tears formed in the eyes of countless people, aliens from species who once mocked humans, once dismissed them as emotional, weak, unpredictable. Now they watched humans die for them. The realization hit them brutally. Humans didn't fight because they were violent. Humans fought because they couldn't stand by and watch others suffer. In the command room, a young intern sobbed openly. Why are they protecting us?" A veteran general wiped his eyes with a shaking hand. "Because that's what humans do," he whispered. "They run into danger, not away from it." The custodian, still steady, still resolute, spoke again, but this time her voice cracked with grief. "Every ship we lose weakens the barrier. If it breaks, the darkness will spread to every corner of your galaxy. We cannot hold it alone." She paused for a heartbeat that felt like a lifetime. "We never could." Her words broke something inside the council. Something prideful, something arrogant, something ancient and stubborn that had kept them blind to who humans truly were. At last, the Chancellor turned toward the ambassadors, her voice trembling but filled with a fragile strength. "We must help them," she said. "We must stand with humanity." But others recoiled, fear choking their reason. "We are not trained for this kind of war. We don't even understand the enemy. What if the humans bring the darkness to us?" The custodian heard their panic and shook her head slowly. "The darkness was always coming. We only delayed it." Her eyes flickered with deep emotion, and she placed a hand against the cold glass of her command deck. "We bled for you in the zone. Now bleed with us." Another tremor struck the planet, roaring like a cosmic earthquake. The shadow stretched further, tearing a fissure in space itself, and from that crack came a sound so horrible it made every living thing shiver. A low, vibrating screech that felt like the dying cry of 1,000 souls. People fell to their knees. Others covered their ears. Even the custodian winced as she braced herself. "It's breaking through," she shouted. "We don't have long." The human fleet adjusted again, this time revealing their final line of defense. Giant carrier-class ships emerged from the deeper fog of the zone, each one larger than anything the Council had built. Battle scars covered them like ancient tattoos, and their engines roared with the power of a species that had refused to die. Humans poured every drop of strength, every shred of spirit, every piece of heart into those vessels. But even that wouldn't be enough. A council ambassador, once known for despising humans, stood up slowly, tears running down his scaled cheeks. "Look at them," he whispered. "They fight with everything. Not for themselves, but for us." A ripple of shame spread across the chamber. Shame for centuries of mockery. Shame for ignoring Earth. Shame for believing humans were weak. The Chancellor raised her hand, voice steadying. "Prepare the fleet," she said. The room froze. Everyone stared at her. "We join them today," she declared, "or our galaxy dies tomorrow." And slowly, one by one, the ambassadors nodded. The ancient fear melted into resolve. The old arrogance dissolved into unity. For the first time in galactic history, species who had hated each other silently agreed on one truth. This was not humanity's fight. This was everyone's fight. And humanity had carried it alone long enough. Outside, the human shield wall flickered, shaking under the growing weight of the shadow. The custodian stood in front of her crew, the blue glow of failing shields reflecting in her tired eyes. She whispered to herself, voice full of aching emotion, "Please hurry. We cannot hold much longer." And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy prepared to stand beside humanity. Not behind them, not beneath them, but beside them as the decision finally rippled through the Galactic Council. An agreement born from fear, shame, and a long-buried respect. Signals burst from every capital across the stars, summoning fleets that had never once united for any cause, calling warriors who had trained for centuries but never faced a threat beyond their borders, awakening ancient ships that had gathered dust in museums and vaults because no one believed they would ever be needed again. And as engines ignited across hundreds of worlds, the galaxy felt something unfamiliar rising inside it. Not fear, not panic, but a trembling spark of courage, a spark humanity had carried alone for 300 long years. On the Council world, crowds looked upward as the night sky filled with movement, hundreds of alien ships pouring into the upper atmosphere, their colors painted across the clouds like streaks of burning hope, their hulls humming with energy as old rivalries were forgotten in the face of a common enemy too monstrous to face separately. Yet even with the gathering armada, every soul who looked toward the horizon felt their breath catch because the darkness behind the human fleet was spreading faster now, its red fissures widening like eyes full of hunger, its tendrils stretching forward as if eager to tear the fabric of reality apart. And even from the ground people could sense its cold pull, a chilling whisper that crawled under their skin and made their hearts sink with the knowledge that they were already too late if humanity fell now. Inside the human flagship, the custodian stood over a hollow map flickering with chaotic red waves representing the creature's influence. Her jaw clenched, sweat running down her temple as she fought to keep her composure while watching the shield lines weaken, ship signatures dimming as human vessels burned themselves out maintaining the barrier. A young human officer stumbled toward her, face pale. "We can't hold much longer," he whispered, voice cracking. "If the Council doesn't launch in the next few minutes, we'll lose the defense arc." The custodian placed a hand on his shoulder, her own voice soft but unwavering. "We do not break," she said. "Not while the galaxy still breathes behind us." Her words steadied him, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Humans were running out of time. The shadow unleashed another screech, shaking the zone's broken boundary so violently that cracks in space formed like lightning, jagged and glowing, and the shockwave slammed into the human fleet with unimaginable force. One of the massive carrier-class ships at the rear shattered, its glowing wings torn apart like paper, and the explosion rippled outward, lighting the darkness with a burst of blue-white fire that looked like a dying star throwing one final cry into the void. The Council world below watched in silence as pieces of the human ship rained into space like glowing tears. In the Council chamber, some ambassadors covered their faces, unable to bear the guilt. Others whispered prayers, and the oldest among them murmured brokenly, "They are dying for us. They are dying because we let them face this alone for too long." But then, a sound thundered through the sky that made the whole planet shake. The first wave of alien fleets arrived. Dozens of species flew side by side for the first time in history, engines roaring, shields shimmering as they formed a second defensive arc behind the humans. Fighters flashed like silver sparks, warships glowed with fierce light, and together they surged forward toward the blockade line humans had built. The custodian looked up at her hologram feed, eyes widening slightly. Not in fear, but in relief so deep it felt like the first breath after drowning for too long. "They came," she whispered, barely audible voice trembling with emotion. The galaxy finally came. Her officers looked at her with renewed determination, their exhaustion shifting into something stronger, hope. The alien ships pushed past the outer atmosphere, joining the humans at the front line. One alien captain transmitted a short signal directly to the custodian. "We stand with you," he said simply. "We stand with humanity." Others followed. "Forgive us. We will not run. Tell us how to fight." And in that moment, something shifted across the battlefield. Not in the stars, not in the technology, not in the formation, but in spirit. Humanity, after centuries of bleeding alone, finally felt a galaxy at their back. The custodian inhaled deeply, her eyes shimmering. "All fleets," she commanded, her voice steady and powerful. "Link shields. Brace for a full push." The formation tightened as alien and human ships merged into a single line, their shield frequencies syncing, their engines humming in harmony. It was messy, imperfect, but it was unity, true unity, for the first time in the galaxy's history. The darkness felt the shift. It screeched again, louder, angrier, slamming its tendrils against the growing wall of combined fleets. But this time the shield held. Sparks flew. Space warped. Lights flickered across the front line. But the wall did not break. Back on the Council world, civilians watched in awe as the human flagship and the alien armada stood side by side in a glowing crescent of defiance. A line of light facing an ocean of darkness. An elderly citizen whispered, tears streaming down her face. This is what humans always tried to teach us." Her granddaughter looked up, eyes wide. "What is that?" The grandmother smiled softly, voice trembling. "That you do not leave anyone alone in the dark." And above them, the human fleet, now reinforced and burning brighter than ever, surged forward with alien ships beside them, the custodian raising her hand like a general leading an army of stars. Humanity's voice cut across every channel, across every heart, across every prayer. For 300 years we stood alone, but today we stand together. And the galaxy, united for the first time, charged into the darkness. The united fleet hurled itself into the darkness with a force that shook the stars, a wall of light crashing against an ocean of shadow as human and alien ships pushed forward side by side, their shields intertwined like linked hearts, refusing to break, refusing to surrender, refusing to let the galaxy fall into silence. The creature roared, a sound that rippled through space like a storm made of pure hunger, its massive form expanding, tearing open new cracks in reality, each one glowing with crimson veins that bled into the void like spreading fire. But the fleet did not stop. They accelerated, engines burning white-hot, every pilot screaming commands, every crew member gripping their consoles with shaking hands, every soul filled with the desperate, united fury of species fighting for their shared existence. The human flagship, with the custodian at its helm, sliced through the darkness like a sword, its hull glowing with blue resonance as she activated systems the galaxy had never seen. Systems born from 3 centuries of surviving inside a nightmare. "All ships, brace!" she shouted, her voice echoing through thousands of channels, steady despite the chaos exploding around her. The united shield flared, forming a blinding arc across the battlefield. And for a moment the creature recoiled, its tendrils snapping back as if burned by the sudden surge of hope. But hope alone was not enough. A tendril slammed into a cluster of alien ships, tearing them apart in seconds, their engines flickering out like dying candles. Another tendril struck a human cruiser, dragging it into the dark fissure with a metallic scream that echoed across the fleet. The custodian flinched at every death, pain filling her eyes, but she stood firm, gripping the railing as energy storms ravaged her ship. "Hold the line," she yelled. "Do not let it through." Her command rippled through the armada, turning fear into fire. Warriors who had once doubted humanity now fought with them, screaming battle cries in a dozen languages, swearing they would not let the humans die after carrying the burden alone for so long. A wounded alien general transmitted a message to the flagship, voice shaking. "We will buy you time. Activate whatever you've been hiding." The custodian's eyes softened with grief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Her hand hovered above a glowing console, an ancient device built from the deepest part of the zone, the final secret of humanity's survival. Project Zenith, she breathed. Begin ignition. The flagship shook violently as the device powered up, its energy spreading like blue veins across every human ship. Suddenly, every vessel linked, forming a massive network of resonance, the same resonance that had allowed humans to survive inside the zone for centuries. The alien fleets felt the energy wash over them, calm, warm, steady, like a heartbeat stronger than fear. The custodian's voice came through again, softer now, filled with a deep emotion that made even the hardest soldiers swallow hard. For 300 years, humanity has carried this alone. Today, we share it with you. Her hand slammed down on the console. A massive pulse blasted outward from the flagship, spreading through the combined fleet, then slamming directly into the creature with the force of a collapsing star. The darkness screamed, a raw, piercing sound that tore through the void like the shriek of a dying titan. Cracks tore across its surface, its crimson fissures trembling violently as the resonance pulse burrowed deeper, destabilizing its core. The custodian staggered as the backlash shook her ship. All fleets, she shouted. Push everything. This is our final chance. And they did. Every ship fired. Every engine burned. Every pilot screamed. Every shield blazed with white fire. It was not just a battle. It was a storm of unity, a flood of every emotion the galaxy had ever felt, every memory, every hope, every life poured into one final desperate strike. The creature convulsed, its massive form collapsing inward, folding like a star imploding under its own weight. Light, pure, brilliant, blinding, burst outward as the shadow's core shattered, dissolving into thousands of fragments that evaporated into the void like dust carried away by a cosmic wind. Silence fell. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then the darkness faded completely. The zone, once a cursed place, glimmered with new light. The United Fleet stood motionless, stunned, crippled, but alive. Slowly, beautifully, painfully, cheers rose across the channels. Some were loud. Some were sobs. Some were simply breaths of relief. On the human flagship, the custodian sank to her knees, exhausted, tears streaming down her face. Not from victory, but from release. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity did not have to stand alone. The council world erupted into tears and applause as the skies cleared, as sunlight returned, as children looked upward without fear. The chancellor whispered, voice trembling, "Humanity saved us, again." On a quiet viewing deck, a small alien child held her mother's hand and asked, "Mama, what are humans?" The mother smiled softly, eyes glistening. "They are the ones who run into the dark so others can stay in the light." And across the galaxy, a new truth settled into every heart.